Order, please. We'll begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. Next week, okay. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Atlantic Canadian governments, already struggling to keep pace with the level of essential services provided by our nation's wealthier provinces, and whereas all Canadian provinces pay into the equalization program, which is indeed intended to provide comparative levels of service, a comparable level of taxation, a constitutional commitment, and whereas that commitment also needs to include sustainable enhanced funding for health care to assist in meeting rising costs, as well as adequate funding to meet growth in social programs under the new Canadian Social Transfer. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House send a letter of unanimous support urging Ottawa to restore the 10 provinces standard within the equalization formula, giving the widening disparity between provinces under the current 5 provinces standard, and call for full inclusion of all revenue sources in determining the level of transfers under the program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notice of motion. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas we are coming to the end of another school year very soon, and whereas many of our students will be graduating from high school right across this province, and whereas Safe Grad is a major program that is used to keep our grads safe and to make sure they have an eventful and fun-filled evening. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the New Waterford Credit Union for sponsoring their 4th annual Safe Grad auction, which raised over $8,700 for a total of $38,000, and recognize the hard work of all the employees at the New Waterford Credit Union. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for the past 11 years, hundreds of students from Yarmouth High School have honoured the sacrifices of World War II veterans through music, video and stage shows under the banner of 440 Productions. Whereas George Egan, the director of 440 Productions, has encouraged young people to achieve their highest potential while making a personal connection with our veterans. And whereas 440 Production is planning a tour of Britain where they will act as ambassadors sharing wartime songs and stories with veterans. Therefore, be it resolved, the students and organizers of 440 Productions be congratulated for their commitment to our veterans, and that the Government of Nova Scotia join the British High Commission, numerous Royal Canadian Legion branches, and others in extending financial support for their planned British tour. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, here and no. Notice table. The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation recently sponsored a contest entitled the CBC Backyard Rink Face-Off, and whereas Michael Townsend of Little Harbour, Shelburne County, constructed a 55 or 35-foot rink in his backyard by cutting down a plum tree and then using lobster crates from one end to the other. And whereas Michael's backyard rink was chosen as the best in Nova Scotia and one of the 10 best across Canada, therefore be it resolved, Little Harbour, Shelburne County resident Michael Townsend be congratulated this morning by all members of this Legislative Assembly for his design and passion in constructing the best outdoor rink in Nova Scotia and one of the 10 best anywhere in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the late Jack Canfield was posthumously inducted into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame on February 7, 2004, And whereas he was a founding member of the Atlantic Motorsport Park in Shubenacadie and also of the Atlantic Motorcycle Competition Racing Association. Whereas Mr. Canfield was a champion who raced throughout Eastern Canada and the United States and was ensured that his legacy lives on through the involvement of his whole family in racing in Shubenacadie. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly acknowledge with pride the accomplishments of the late Jack Canfield and extend its condolences to the family of the champion racer. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas being a burn camp victim is a painful and traumatic experience for children, and whereas the Atlantic Burn Camp is a program free of charge designed for children from the Atlantic provinces who have received burn injury, and whereas the camp is staffed by well-trained professionals including firefighters, police, and medical personnel, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the important and courageous work of the Atlantic Burn Camp and encourage them to continue their excellent service to these children. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Guysborough Regional Development Authority has launched a plan to promote outdoor recreational opportunities in the county, and whereas the authority has released a detailed guidebook identifying pristine opportunities available in Guysborough County, and whereas the book consists of 120 pages identifying places for everything from diving to canoeing while ranking each location with a degree of difficulty. Therefore be it resolved, MLAs commend the executive and the staff of the Guysborough Regional Development Authority for their creativity in attempting to promote Guysborough County as an excellent outdoor location to tours. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabakdal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be seeking waiver. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Symphony Nova Scotia, Mobile Exxon, and the Halifax Area Schools Music Program have joined together to introduce the Adopt a Musician program. And whereas the Adopt a Musician program teams members of Symphony Nova Scotia with elementary school students in grades 4, 5, and 6. And whereas in Halifax, Shabakto, Symphony Nova Scotia's first violinist, Jennifer Jones, will be visiting young musicians at Westmount School for a 6-week period to encourage the students to compose their own music for a performance concert to be held this month at the Rebecca Cohen Auditorium. Therefore, be it resolved that this House thank the participating members of Symphony Nova Scotia, the Halifax Area Schools Music Program, and ExxonMobil for the introduction of this innovative teaching initiative to Halifax classrooms, and congratulates the young musical composers who, through hands-on training, are benefiting from the Adopt a Musician program. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas being a victim of crime or to be in an accident is a terrifying experience for anyone, but especially for children. Whereas, like many police departments across North America, the Cape Breton Regional Police Service uses a teddy bear or stuffed animal to soothe frightened children. And whereas the Glace Bay Lions Club's recent campaign to collect stuffed toys has been such a huge success, with over 100 toys being collected, and they've decided to make this an ongoing endeavor. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate the Glace Bay Lions Club on the success of this collection and wish them every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Thorburn Fire Department during February's difficult and deep snow period used their rescue sled to assist the Trenton Fire Department in an important life-saving rescue. And whereas the rescue became necessary after a man driving a snowmobile ended up buried in deep snow and could not get out. And whereas the Thorburn Fire Chief, Dave Swanico, and his department traveled nearly a mile into the woods to do the necessary rescue and evacuation. Therefore, be it resolved that MLAs pay tribute to both members of the Thorburn and Trenton Fire Departments, ready to assist in whatever rescue is necessary at any given time of the day. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas seniors, their families, local seniors clubs, and seniors councils have worked hard since September 2002 to end the unfair impoverishment of nursing home residents. And whereas many individuals made the difficult choice to make their personal situation public in an effort to end those shameful and unfair fees. And whereas the Premier heeded the strong message from Nova Scotians in favour of ending those unfair fees for medical care now without further undue delay, therefore be it resolved that this House salutes the seniors of Nova Scotia, the friends and loved ones of all long-term care residents, for the love, commitment, and persistence with which they successfully gained unanimous support in this House for an end this fiscal year to the use of seniors' life savings to pay for their health care in nursing homes. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Duke of Edinburgh's awards were established on a voluntary non-competitive basis in the mid-1950s, divided into 3 categories, bronze, silver, and gold, to challenge young people between the ages of 14 to 25 to reach their highest potential. Whereas to receive the Duke of Edinburgh's award, each participant must complete 4 components: physical activity, skills development, service to the community, and finally outdoor expedition. To receive the gold award, participants must also meet the residential component, where they are required to spend 4 nights, 5 days in an environment where they are unfamiliar. And whereas Emily Reed of Kingston has completed the 5 components necessary to be awarded the Gold Duke of Edinburgh's Award by volunteering in the Kings West High School Kids Helpline, school canteen, peer education, Heartwood Institute volunteer, 240 hours, jazz, dance, ballet, swimming, hiking throughout the Cape Breton Highlands. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate Ms. Reed for this tremendous accomplishment and wish her every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas community fundraising is important to assist health districts deliver high-quality programs and services, and whereas the Health Services Foundation of the South Shore has pledged nearly $270,000 towards the creation of a dedicated respiratory department at the South Shore Regional Hospital, and whereas the department will house an expanded sleep disorder laboratory and a lung function testing unit. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House express our appreciation to the members and staff of the Health Services Foundation of the South Shore for their continued efforts to help improve health programs for patients at the South Shore Regional Hospital. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this government in their throne speech has promised to designate both Gully Lake and Egg Mountain as wilderness protection areas, and whereas a recent poll commissioned by the Ecology Action Centre and the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society show that Nova Scotians overwhelmingly support more protection for wilderness and our native wildlife, and whereas preserving nature for now and for future generations makes biological as well as economic sense, therefore it be resolved that this government proceed as quickly as possible to designate Gully Lake and Egg Mountain as wilderness protection areas. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture has recently launched a campaign to contribute surplus beef due to the U.S. border closure and the BSE situation to the Metro Food Bank Society, and whereas the food banks from Yarmouth to Sydney are members of the Metro Food Bank Society and will benefit from this program, and whereas the families who use the service of the food banks are not in a financial position to purchase fresh or frozen meat on a regular basis, and these donations will be a tremendous asset to the traditional well-being of these families. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the generous donation made by the farmers of Nova Scotia.
Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canada Council for the Arts in Bell Canada awarded artist and writer Tom Sherman the 2003 Bell Canada Award for Outstanding Achievement in Video Art, and whereas on March 30th, 2004, Mr. Sherman received this $10,000 prize from the acting chair of the Canada Council, Natalie Stewart, and Bell Canada Executive Vice President Terry Mosey at a ceremony in Toronto, and whereas Mr. Sherman and his wife, Jan Potty, spend their summers living in Somerville, Queens County, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mr. Tom Sherman on winning this prestigious award from the Canada Council for the Arts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers add immeasurable value to our communities through their contributions, and whereas Sid Gosley has volunteered with the Dartmouth Museum Society, the Dartmouth Historical Association, the Dartmouth Heritage Advisory Committee, the Dartmouth Rotary Club, and the Woodlawn Kiwanis Club, and other worthy organizations and causes, and whereas Mr. Gosley was recently recognized at Nova Scotia's Provincial Volunteer Day Awards ceremony for his volunteer efforts that span more than 30 years, therefore be it resolved, the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Mr. Sid Gosley for his volunteer efforts and wish him well in his future volunteer efforts. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Digby's very own Paul Gidney has been powerlifting since 1994, and whereas on March the 21st he entered a powerlifting competition in Kitchener-Waterloo, and whereas Paul Gidney came away with both gold and silver medals, walking away with the Canadian National Bench Press title by bench pressing an amazing 391.5 pounds. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Paul Gidney and wish him every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bridgewater resident Helen Nogler is a dedicated community volunteer who has spent a great portion of her life serving many organizations in her community. And whereas Mrs. Nogler was instrumental in establishing throughout the local chapter of the Canadian Cancer Society, she is a volunteer for the Hillside Pines Home for Special Care and a committed fundraiser for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and has served in many capacities with the Bridgewater Curling Club. And whereas Mrs. Nogler was selected as Bridgewater's 2004 representative volunteer for her many volunteer efforts. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Helen Nogler on being named the Town of Bridgewater's representative volunteer and extend her thanks on her many years of services to the community. I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Three Dolphins is celebrating 10 years of business in the St. Margaret's Bay area, whereas the Three Dolphins owner Kathy McLean and Hal Underwood have made valuable contributions to our community, and whereas the Three Dolphins' professionalism serves as an important example, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Three Dolphins on its 10th anniversary with best wishes in its future endeavors. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Question waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Annapolis on a resolution you read a few minutes ago. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask for a waiver, and I would read the therefore if I could. If that's.
Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. Halifax Clayton Park.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nova Scotia have honored Judy Steele, CA, with the 2003 Ross L. Towler CA of the Year Award, which was established to honor a CA with a commitment to their community. And whereas Judy Steele has served as National Chair of the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation, is a past board member of Bryony House, Metro United Way, and numerous charities, where her professional experience and desire to give back to her community have made a significant contribution. And whereas Ms. Steele has consistently shown her will to help others, it is this determination that has given her the distinction of being named the first female president of the Halifax Club. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Judy Steele for this recognition. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion carried. Order, please. Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a creative writing vacation package known as Writing the Historical Novel being offered in Liverpool in June has made the pages of one of the world's most respected newspapers, and whereas Susan Borgensen, a resident of Eastport, Medway, Queens County, and co-founder of Creative Holidays Nova Scotia with Russell Barton, a teacher from Chester Basin, said she was taken aback when she picked up her telephone one morning to find a reporter from the United Kingdom's Observer asking questions. And whereas Mrs. Borgensen and Mr. Barton are astonished with the calls they've been getting from places as far away as Israel and Holland, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the creative minds of Susan and Russell and wish them 100% success with their vacation writing workshop. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cavalier Drive School in Lower Sackville has a long tradition of active and successful participation in all areas of sports, and whereas the Cavalier Drive School skipping team jumped to it along with Coach Mary Dunn and assistant coach Leanne McLeod qualified in the provincial competition on April 3, 2004 to advance to the Nationals, and whereas the Cavalier skipping team will be competing in the Canadian Rope Skipping Federation National Championships being held May 21st to the 23rd at Acadia University in Wolfville. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the team members and coaching staff of Jump To It from Cavalier Drive School on reaching the National Rope Skipping Championships and wish them success on their bid to the national champions and represent. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, on their bid to be national champions and represent Canada at the World Competition being held this summer in New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since 1977, the Black Cultural Centre of Nova Scotia has served as an education centre and museum for Nova Scotians, recognizing the achievements of African Nova Scotians. And whereas on March 20, 2004, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia honored Halifax Regional Police officers of African heritage. And whereas the Halifax Regional Police Wall of Recognition has been created to acknowledge their contributions to our community, Constable Jonathan Jeffries' name has been added to this wall. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Constable Jonathan Jeffries and honor his service to our community. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the needs of our aging population are a significant factor in the rising health care requirements of our system in Nova Scotia, and whereas not only has funding for our health system risen significantly over the last several years to meet such needs, DHAs have also been given the security of a commitment of $124 million through multi-year funding over the next 3 years. And whereas the Romano report specified that the federal government should increase funding from 18% by increments of 1% until it reached 1/4 of healthcare funding in our province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House speak with one voice in support of our province's unique circumstances with regard to health care, and encourage the federal government to move quickly on the recommendations, adhering to the true intent of Romano's findings and becoming a real partner in health funding. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. I hear a no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sarah Drake, former UCCB soccer star, had her number 5 raised in the rafters of the Sullivan Fieldhouse, and only the 4th jersey retired by the University College of Cape Breton. And whereas in her first year with the Capers in 1998, she was selected the Atlantic University Rookie of the Year and First Team All-Canadian. And whereas in her last year, 2002-2003, she was selected Atlantic University Player of the Year, First Team All-Canadian, Canadian Inter-University Sports Player of the Year, and Atlantic Sport BLG Award nominee. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulate Sarah Drake for her distinguished varsity soccer career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers, it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in August of 2002, the province signed an agreement with the Federal Department of Immigration to establish a provincial nominee program, this program allowing the province to participate for the selection of immigrants who would be issued certificates to settle in Nova Scotia. And whereas when employees of the nominee program appeared before Economic Development Committee in November 2003, they reported that had only issued 16 nomination certificates with 10 more pending for final approval. And as of February 2004, the total number of certificates issued still remains under 30, being a 7.5% success rate. And whereas almost 2 years after the announcement of this program, the province has not used this tremendous opportunity to have 400 new immigrants living in Nova Scotia or destined for Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved, the minister assure the necessary resources will be directed to this provincial nominee program to guarantee the province remains competitive. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion's carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers give so generously of their energy, skills, and family time, are the unsung heroes and the backbones of our communities. And whereas April the 18th to April the 24th is National Volunteer Week, a week dedicated to honoring many volunteers who are the key to community success. And whereas Doris Rose Warnell was recognized at the Provincial Volunteer Day and by the Halifax Regional Municipality for her many efforts in the community, including organizing the Harborview School Breakfast Program, the Holy Trinity Church Clothing Depot, the Christmas Hamper, the Parish Council, Brownie and Guide Leader, District 9 Neighborhood Watch, and Vice President of the Dartmouth North Newspaper Society, and much more. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature recognize the important role volunteers play in our lives and pay tribute to Doris Rose Warnell for her outstanding volunteer services, which has contributed to the well-being of the Dartmouth North community. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a kitchen party has been a long-time tradition throughout Nova Scotia, and whereas on May 1st, the Glace Bay Radio Club will hold a kitchen party fundraiser with a number of musicians and singers donating their time and talent in support of various community organizations. Whereas this event is open to anyone who wishes to attend and would be more than welcome to step up to the microphone or pick up an instrument. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate the Glace Bay Radio Club for the work they do in the community of Glace Bay and wish them every success with their fundraiser. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call the order of business government motions?
Government motions.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 941, the Estimates Committee of the Whole House on Supply?
Resolution number 941. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview, you have approximately 51 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to continue the debate and reply to the budget. Members will be relieved to know I don't intend to repeat what I said yesterday. Mr. Speaker, somebody said to me yesterday that they asked me if it was an NDP budget. Now, Mr. Speaker, this House should be so lucky that it would be an NDP budget. In last summer's election, the NDP went to the people with 7 key commitments. And this budget addresses 2.5, maybe 3 of them. So by no means is it an NDP budget. But the government does get full marks for resolving the long-term care issue. We talked about that yesterday. It's not every question has been answered, not every detail is known. There are some issues that we need to find out the details of in the course of the budget debate and in the weeks and months to come about how we go from this transition of considering assets and income up until December 31st and then not doing any of that after January 1st. It creates some incentives and disincentives for families to act in certain ways. It may give families, for example, an incentive to keep loved ones at home longer than they should. It is appropriate that, of course, that Nova Scotians stay at home, be cared for at home for as long as is reasonably possible, but that depends on appropriate home care being available. And it's not entirely clear that that can be the case to the extent that we all wish that it could be. So there are a number of issues over the transition, but let's give the government full marks. If we're talking about the NDP's 7 key commitments, that is one commitment that this government has delivered on. The 7th key commitment that we made in last summer's election was to deliver on our commitments within a balanced budget. And I'll give the government almost full marks in this one, almost full marks. The budget is balanced according to generally accepted accounting principles. But as usual, Mr. Speaker, there's been a bit of fancy dancing. There's been a bit of shuffling things around, taking things that are going to be being done later this year and allocating them back to the previous year. There have been some changes in accounting policy, which, like all changes in accounting policy, that the government has adopted, ultimately works to the government's benefit. The debt of Nova Scotia is still growing, so we know we still have an issue. As long as that debt is still growing, we're facing the growth in interest payments on the debt. And after all, that is the prize at the end of all this belt tightening, is to allocate less of our provincial budget to interest on the debt. And we must never forget that that is the objective of all this belt tightening. And it's going to take a lot of commitment from whoever is in on the government side of the House, because if we pay down $100 million of the debt, $100 million, it frees up only $7 million in the following budget year, on average, in interest payments. So you pay $100 million and you get a $7 million return. Now, of course, the key is that $7 million is freed up forever, each and every year following. So you have to have a government that is willing to look 14 years down the road for the payoff. And there are very few governments that this province has had that has looked, past 14 weeks or 14 months in the future, never mind 14 years. Because that's the real payoff, Mr. Speaker, when you free up that $7 million each and every year forever. I won't give the government full marks in the balanced budget because this government still has a problem in being forthright with Nova Scotians. Last November 14th, the Auditor General issued an extraordinary special report in which he quite rightly spanked the government and this finance minister and the last finance minister for laying on the table misleading and incomplete financial information, Mr. Speaker. That is what the Auditor General said. That's not me saying it. That's not our caucus saying it. It's the Auditor General of Nova Scotia saying that the government laid financial information on the table that was incomplete and inaccurate and potentially misleading. That included information in last year's budget documents. And so part of our task here in the opposition side of the House is to examine this year's budget documents, to make sure that we understand all the implications, to make sure that we don't let the government off the hook if they've tried to bury some bad news. So we'll give them almost full marks for achieving our key commitment in the last election, which was to deliver on our key commitments within a balanced budget. On waiting times, Mr. Speaker, I think at best half a point for at least addressing it, for at least having something to say about it. The steps the government's taking on waiting times are small and tentative, but at least they're there, and they're facing the right direction. And as I said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, this government has shown time and again, nowhere more so than in the long-term care issue, that where they're not willing to lead, they can be pushed. Yep. And this government can count on the fact that on the issue of waiting times for medical care, we are going to push them. We are going to push them hard, because that is a priority of Nova Scotians. More resources for the classroom was another one of our key commitments, and at best, I think, Mr. Speaker, again, we'll give the government half a point for this, at best. There is a lot more information that we need about what the numbers in yesterday's budget mean for the education system. There is this question of, for those of us who represent Halifax area ridings, of supplementary funding. The City Council, HRM Council, has fought back a little bit from relentless downloading from this government, and they've said that if there is more downloading, it's going to be cut from supplementary funding. It's a very controversial thing, but what it means, the signal that they're sending, is that they want a dialogue with the provincial government. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be a partner in education funding. And it's not clear today to anybody in the education system how that's all going to play out, because the budget documents, such as they were vague and not as clear as they could be or should be on this very important point. And it's something that I know our education critic, the member for Timberley Prospect, and our caucus will be looking for answers on. It's very good, Mr. Speaker, to see a bit more money allocated to tuition agreements. Two of the most difficult individual cases that I've ever had to work on in my time here as an MLA have involved precisely this issue. Students who, for very personal reasons, do not fit into the regular school system, could not fit into the regular school system. They took advantage, both of them, it so happened, took advantage of the St. Thomas Aquinas School, alternative school over in Dartmouth. And both of those families were told that the government would not fund it. Because although there was this kind of fiction out there that tuition agreements could be funded in principle, the hard reality was that the Halifax Regional School Board never approved them, would never approve them, because they always said that the regular school system could deliver a program to those students even when it was obvious to everyone in the schools, in the family, that that was not the case. It was a fiction that was played upon these families, Mr. Speaker. So it's good to see the government addressing that, even if it is in a small way, but we need more information. And I know that my colleague, the member for Timberley Prospect, will be doing that. He will be digging. He'll be ferreting out the information. It is a very, very important issue for those families that are affected by it. The government is tackling the class size issue, and you know, Mr. Speaker, my oldest son, is one of the beneficiaries of the class size initiative because he's in grade primary this year, and this is the first year that class sizes have been capped at 25 for grade primary. And as he marches through the school system, he will continue to benefit from the expansion of the class size cap as he works his way through the system. But even that, Mr. Speaker, isn't as simple as it sounds. Because it was only fairly recently that I discovered that the class size cap isn't really a class size cap after all. Why is it that there can't just be a simple answer to some of these solutions so that when the government says that class sizes are capped at 25, they just mean it? And we know that we could not visit any grade primary classroom in Nova Scotia with more than 25 students in it. Why can't they just do that? Because it's not entirely the case. And I only discovered this recently. Actually, it was in the constituency of my colleague across the way, the member for Halifax Clayton Park, which is a growth area of HRM, that I discovered that the class size cap only applies until September 30th every year. Then it comes off, and the class can grow to whatever size it has to grow to accommodate the students. You know, there's a lot of people transferring in Clayton Park, and to a lesser extent in Fairview, over the course of the year. And there is no class size cap after September 30th. So it creates kind of perverse incentive for school principals to do a bit of fancy dancing around class size numbers to maintain the fiction that classes are 25 until September 30th, and then they can do whatever they want. So if a member of this House were to go out to certain schools, certainly in the Clayton Park area of Halifax, and I'm sure in other areas of HRM and around the province, they could walk into grade primary classes that have more than 25 students in them. So even that promise, Mr. Speaker, is not as simple as it sounds, and that's the kind of detailed information that the government should be delivering to us in this legislature and delivering to the people. It should not be the kind of thing that we have to ferret out on our own. So, Mr. Speaker, those are the things on which I'll give the government marks. That's why I say that no one could call this an NDP budget, because it delivers on only 2.5 or maybe 3 of our 7 key commitments. There's nothing in the budget, of course, on auto insurance, but to be fair to the government, that's not a budget issue. It's not a budget issue, and you wouldn't expect to see anything in the budget on auto insurance. But anybody who thinks the auto insurance issue has been solved is kidding themselves, Mr. Speaker. It has only been delayed. It's only been delayed till this fall when the freeze comes off. And then we're going to be right back at it. What are we going to do about skyrocketing auto insurance rates? Because they're coming back, Mr. Speaker. They're coming back. Just wait till the fall, Mr. Speaker. It's going to be right back near the top of the political agenda. No marks to the government on providing relief on the essentials of living. One of our key commitments in the last election, the HST is not a fair tax. It is a regressive tax. It hits people in the lower end of the income scale harder than those at the upper end, and yet we tax things that are a necessity of life, like home heating fuel. And I'm sure that Nova Scotians have their own ideas about what the necessities of life are, but we have to, Mr. Speaker, do something about the fact that we impose a regressive tax on a necessity of life like home heating fuel. No marks to the government about that. There is nothing in this budget to provide that kind of relief. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to say there are no marks to the government on post-secondary tuition. There is nothing in this budget for student, and I was very sorry to hear David Hare, the president of the Canadian Federation of Students, saying last night that there's nothing in this budget for students. Tuition fees at the post-secondary level are going up again. There is nothing in here to stop it, no hope that they'll be stopped, Mr. Speaker, and nothing to deal with debt relief for students. I was disappointed to hear Sean Riley, the president of the Nova Scotia Association of University Presidents, saying that the government keeps talking about making university a priorities, but never in actual practical fact do it. We've got a problem, Mr. Speaker. We've got a big problem looming in our universities, and no marks to the government on that score. So that's why I say, Mr. Speaker, that although we very much like and very much support and congratulate the government for the move it has made on the long-term care issue, no one should mistake this budget for an NDP budget.
No way.
Mr. Speaker, on some other issues that I'll mention briefly that I and my colleagues will be examining over the course of the estimates debate, which will happen in this House over the next 2.5 weeks, the intensive line-by-line, item-by-item, program-by-program examination of the budget. These are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Thursday, was Budget Day, but when I think of Thursday, I think of something else. Thursday is also Food Bank Day in my constituency. The West End Ecumenical Food Bank serves a large area of West End Halifax, covering almost all of my constituency of Halifax Fairview, a good chunk of Halifax Clayton Park, and a good chunk of Halifax Chebucto. Mr. Speaker, I often go to the food bank. I work there on a Thursday, and I'm not going to say that it's for altruistic reasons that I do it. They don't need me. They functioned perfectly well before I started working there, and they'll function perfectly well if I never show up again. But one of the things that does for me is it reminds me every single week what it is I'm doing here. Yep. Because if the government's budget doesn't impact positively that food bank and the people who have to take advantage of it, Mr. Speaker, then we have the wrong priorities. And I don't work there on Thursdays when the House is sitting, but when I go back after this House rises, Mr. Speaker, I don't expect there to be any change in the numbers of people who have to take advantage of that food bank, because I don't see anything substantive in the budget for those people. So, Mr. Speaker, for some people, yesterday, Thursday, was Budget Day. For me, it is and always will be Food Bank Day. St. John's Anglican Church, the corner of Dutch Village Road and Joseph Howe Drive in my constituency. And it is only when they see their numbers go down that I'll know the government is really addressing and that I am addressing the issues that really matter. Municipalities today, Mr. Speaker, are either disappointed by the budget or mystified by it. They have a lot of questions about how the changes in the budget will affect them. And so that's one thing that I know our municipal affairs critic and others interested in municipal issues will be looking for answers for. What exactly does this mean for the Cape Breton Regional Municipality? What does it mean for the Halifax Regional Municipality? What does it mean for the 53 other municipal units? We could read the budget, the municipalities could read the budget and still have no idea. It's good to see that the government has not chosen layoffs or wage freezes or contract extensions or any of those methods of attacking the civil service in order to balance the budget. If there are any layoffs flowing from the budget, they will be very few, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad to see that the government, this year at least, is respecting the bargaining process and has allocated some money towards that. How much we don't know, and that's fair enough, Mr. Speaker. The governments have a right to put in their restructuring fund an allocation for wage settlements and not have to reveal to the parties on the other side of the bargaining table exactly how much they've set aside. But let's hope there's a fair settlement, Mr. Speaker, a reasonable settlement, and it's good to see that the government is not going to force us to go through the pain, the difficulty that Newfoundland and Labrador is going through right now. Mr. Speaker, it is disappointing to see nothing in the budget about the environment, nothing connecting the environment to health and health promotion. We must never forget the environment as one of our priorities, something that needs to be addressed explicitly and progressively, Mr. Speaker. Disappointing to see nothing on that. As I said yesterday, disappointing to see a budget with no mention of Cape Breton in it, no mention of economic development. We live in a relatively small province, Mr. Speaker. We live in a relatively small province of under 1 million people. And it is a shame, but it's a fact that we have to deal with, that we have many more than, we don't just have one economy in this province. The economy in Halifax is going okay. I'd never say it's going great, Mr. Speaker, because, when we have provinces like Manitoba and Saskatchewan competing with Alberta for the lowest unemployment rate in the country at around 5%, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we should be content with unemployment rates around 7 or 8%. But Cape Breton can only dream of an unemployment rate of 7 or 8%, Mr. Speaker. There is a totally different economy there, only exacerbated by yesterday's announcement by Stream and Glace Bay. The government has got to come to grips with that, and I see nothing in the budget to do that. And then there's the economy of the rural mainland. Very different from the Cape Breton economy, very different even from the HRM economy. And really what's happening is that the HRM economy, Mr. Speaker, is basically growing to include anybody within any kind of a driving distance of Halifax. Now the HRM economy is extending way out into Hants County, away down the South Shore, way up the Eastern Shore, even into, Mr. Speaker, Pictou County, and I'm sure there are even some people up in Cumberland and Colchester County, I know in Colchester County, but maybe even as far as Cumberland County, where they have to go here for work. They have to come here to make a living for their families, Mr. Speaker. This government has got to come to grips with that, and I don't see anything in the budget that says that they understand that. So, Mr. Speaker, those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. Those are the issues that we'll be taking time to consider in detail. That's our job now. We have two jobs. One is to go out and consult widely with Nova Scotians and say, does this budget meet your priorities? Is it enough? Is there enough there that you think we should support the budget, or does it not meet your priorities, and is a better budget possible? That's our first job, Mr. Speaker, to go out and consult with people. And our second job is right here in the legislature, line by line, page by page, to understand every detail of the budget, to understand every implication of every dollar. And when we've completed those two jobs, Mr. Speaker, then and only then will we be in a position to tell this House and to tell the people of Nova Scotia how we intend to vote on the budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, it's my great pleasure to represent my party today, the Liberal Party, as we go into the budget debate. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because it is the Liberal Party who has held this government accountable for their fiscal mismanagement. Yes? Thank you. It is the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, who told the government that the tax cut was premature. And it was the Liberal Party, and I might say the Liberal Party alone, who took the courageous step of opposing the tax cut in the last election and in the last session of this legislature.
Hear, hear.
We campaigned, we campaigned on a responsible platform that included freezing user fees, freezing corporate taxes, and holding the line on personal income tax. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're facing a budget which has jacked up user fees by $12 million, increased corporate taxes by $17.5 million, and finally has grudgingly faced reality and taken away the tax cut that was offered to Nova Scotians only last January. New taxes, higher personal taxes for some, and a reversal in a key political election platform. What is so disturbing about this budget and the choices presented to Nova Scotians by this government is that it all could have been avoided. It could have been avoided if the Premier had faced reality and swallowed his pride sooner. Hear, hear. If the Conservatives had put people ahead of politics, we would be looking at a very different budget today. If the NDP had placed aside their political ambitions, Mr. Speaker, if they would truly have acted...
Shame on that government. Shame on the socialists that helped them, too. Shame on those socialists.
Just wait.
Shame on the
Order.
socialists.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable members allowed the order, please. The honourable member allowed the previous member of the official opposition the opportunity to respond to the budget. And I asked the honourable members to give the honourable member Halifax Clayton Park the same response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the NDP would truly have acted on behalf of Nova Scotia's working families instead of simply using them as a campaign slogan, we would be looking today at a very different budget. If the NDP had joined us and forced the government to rescind the tax before it ever came into effect, I repeat, we would be looking today at a very different budget. These opportunities to do what was in the best interest of Nova Scotians were squandered by the government and by the NDP, and that is unfortunate. The announcement made by the Premier on Tuesday was an admission that, in fact, Nova Scotia could not afford his tax cut and that steps had to be taken to rescind at least a portion of it. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I would contend the government knew all along that the tax cut could not be afforded. They knew, as did the NDP, that the tax cut was not affordable. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, much damage has been done. Many of the concerns that we are facing here today could have been avoided if only the government had acted responsibly and not spent needed resources on a premature tax cut. And the most disturbing aspect, Mr. Speaker, is the Premier's criteria for bringing back the tax cut. The Premier has indicated that the minute the federal government puts more money into health, the tax cut is back on. Has this government learned nothing? Federal money for health is intended for health, not for a tax cut. Taking provincial money out of health the minute federal dollars come in is irresponsible, and in some ways it is immoral. Ottawa is giving the provinces more money for health, not more money so that provincial governments can play political games. The budget presented to us, I would contend, Mr. Speaker, is a budget of desperation as opposed to preparation. The choices made in this budget do not reflect well-thought-out policy. They do not reflect consultation with stakeholders in health, education, and various other areas. This is, in fact, a budget of self-inflicted wounds. What we see in this budget are decisions based on financial hardships. Hardships brought upon this government not by Ottawa, but by the finance minister, as the finance minister would like us to believe, but rather by his own and their own mismanagement. As a result, the government has been forced to make decisions that are difficult for Nova Scotians, decisions to scramble to find more revenues for the province in order to balance the budget and have enough money left over so that the Minister of Health can make an important investment in health that has been a long time in coming. We are finally going to see the health care costs of seniors in nursing homes finally covered by the government. That's something we support, but now that we can afford it. Healthcare, Mr. Speaker, is facing a crisis in Nova Scotia. Last fall, courageous nurses from the QE2 took matters into their own hands and drew the attention of all Nova Scotians to the unacceptable conditions facing their patients at the emergency room. The government, in their typical fashion, gave the nurses a lot of words, a glossy brochure, and very little action. As my colleagues from Glace Bay and Kings West would be able to tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is not just the QE2 that is facing these challenges. As part of the roundtable on healthcare wait times, my colleagues have toured healthcare facilities across Nova Scotia. They have spoken to healthcare providers and administrators, and finally, they've spoken to people across Nova Scotia who are trying to access the system.
Go back to sleep.
The money announced in this budget is a step in the right direction. More money is needed in healthcare, but this money requires a plan. As Roy Romano told the federal government and all governments in Canada, pouring good money after bad won't fix the problem. Yeah. Nova Scotia needs an investment in the future. It needs a shift to new approaches in the delivery of healthcare services. Healthcare can't continue with a business-as-usual approach. The time has come to embrace new technologies, new efficiencies which will allow the government to provide better healthcare more effectively. New technology like the telehealth initiative brought forward by the former Liberal government can help us bridge the gap between healthcare provided in Middle Musquodoboit, Florence, Liverpool, and Halifax. But, Mr. Speaker, it requires a significant investment. Mr. Speaker, the investment of $230 million in health announced in the budget is a welcome addition. However, we feel some areas of vital importance may have been overlooked by this budget. The government is investing a sum of less than $10 million to address wait times. Although we do believe that a better information system and the better collection of wait times data is important, just as important is the need to invest in human resources and improve facilities. Mr. Speaker, home care is another avenue that has been chronically underfunded by this government, and again we see very little investment in this area of health care. Home care not only provides an essential service for those individuals who may be able to recover at home rather than in their hospital beds, it also helps to free up more acute care beds and improve the situation with regard to wait times. We are happy to see money being put back into the #1 priority of Nova Scotians, but we will be happier when we see the detailed plan on how the government intends to make strategic investments so that Nova Scotians can see improvements in the access to the system. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, the Liberal Party pressured the provincial government to put in place the Office of Health Promotion, and I am happy to say that they have done that. I'm happy to say that they have done that, Mr. Speaker, but that is all that they've done. They did not give the office the money it needs to do the job it was created to do. In this budget, we're seeing a continuation of that lack of commitment. Although the minister may rise and say the government has increased the budget by what would appear to be a large percent, the fact of the matter is the budget has increased by only $3.6 million. This is woefully inadequate in a province that has some of the worst health indicators in the country. We believe that the investment in health promotion should equal the revenue expected this year from the recent cigarette tax hike. That would put more than $20 million alone into the Office of Health Promotion. The programs required to educate Nova Scotians and to assist Nova Scotians in living healthier lifestyles requires an investment of time and resources. This government has not come forward with the resources, Mr. Speaker. They have only scratched the surface in the area of health promotion, an area that will pay tremendous dividends in future through a healthier, more active society. The government's short-sighted decision to underfund the Office of Health Promotion will cost us significantly in the future. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about what is not in the budget. I know this may be a little bit unusual, but I feel it's vitally important. I feel it's important because we have a serious problem in Nova Scotia, which is getting worse year by year, and the longer we go without fixing it, the harder it will be to fix. I'm referring, of course, to the economic divide which currently exists between our rural communities and those communities that are within an hour's drive of Halifax. The lack of mention about rural economic development is troubling indeed. The fact that the economy of Cape Breton has also been ignored in this budget is even more troubling. Rural economies in Nova Scotia and the communities which support them are struggling to survive. Although the Premier and the Minister of Finance like giving speeches proclaiming increased jobs for Nova Scotia, the reality is those new jobs just don't extend to rural Nova Scotia. Shame. For example, Mr. Speaker, since June of 2003, the reality for Nova Scotia has been a dramatic loss in jobs. Since June 2003, the very month that saw $155 pre-election checks go out in Nova Scotia, the unemployment rate has risen in the Annapolis Valley by nearly 1%, a loss of 800 jobs. Shame. In the North Shore region, the unemployment rate has gone from 9.7 to 10.4%, representing 2,900 lost jobs. In southern Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, unemployment has gone up an alarming 1.6%, now at almost 12%, and 3,800 jobs were lost. And finally, in Cape Breton, the official unemployment has gone up by almost 1% to 16%, which means 3,900 fewer jobs.
Oh, my gracious.
A shameful record indeed.
Shame, Ernie.
And what is the government's response to these job losses? This budget raises corporate investment taxes, which discourages business expansion and job creation. It increases user fees, which hurt all Nova Scotians, and introduces a new top-end tax rate. This government has the audacity to talk about competitiveness and keeping Nova Scotia competitive, when clearly they don't know the meaning of the word in today's globalized economy. Mr. Speaker, in preparation for the budget, I've traveled to communities across Nova Scotia to meet with business and municipal leaders. The recurring theme of these talks has been the need for a regional approach to development that will recognize the unique challenges and opportunities that exist in all parts of our province. Not every community has the same needs, and the approach from government should recognize this. Yeah. In Cape Breton, as in other parts of the province, the loss of population is a key concern. People leave when there are no jobs to sustain them, when the infrastructure has been allowed to deteriorate, when the community services and government services are closed or moved elsewhere. Rural economic development has to be addressed on a region-by-region basis. In Yarmouth and Sydney, there's deep concern about maintaining the regional airports. The southern part of the province lacks regional government services that have been located in Kentville or Bridgewater, rather than Yarmouth, Digby, or Shelburne. This part of the province is served with unfinished provincial highways, and they face long distances to access services. Everywhere that I visited, there was concern for rural roads that are so vital in keeping communities economically vibrant. Amherst is wondering when government will get serious about making the Moncton to Halifax economic corridor something other than the barbell that it is today.
Hear that, Ernie?
Mr. Speaker, government has a responsibility to cultivate an environment that will grow our economy. It's alarming to see in this budget the continued decimation of the Office of Economic Development. Government has an important role to play in attracting jobs and new investment to our rural communities, and that means both commitment and money. The Liberal Party has listened to the concerns of rural business, and we understand the frustration they feel with crumbling infrastructure in rural Nova Scotia. It places an unfair burden on rural business and in many cases discourages investment in the first place. We believe, Mr. Speaker, the backbone of any growing economy is the transportation system that will serve the needs of the people. For too long, our roads have been made to suffer in the name of fiscal restraint, while our rural economy suffers as a result. This government said in their 1999 Blue Book that they would present a comprehensive, nonpartisan, multi-year plan for secondary road improvements.
Where is it?
But we have yet to see it.
Still work.
Government has an opportunity to send a strong signal to rural business once and for all, allocating the gas taxes paid at the pumps back into the roads of this province, another past promise of this government. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation may try to tell you that in fact they already do this. No, Mr. Speaker, the proof of this government's inaction on roads is as glaring as the pothole in front of your door and the bumpy roads across this province. From Cumberland County to Richmond County and all parts in between, the roads of this province have been neglected. Nova Scotia's rural communities need a clear indication that from government that they have a vision. The lack of vision for rural Nova Scotia is apparent. The silence from this government in this budget speaks volumes.
That's right.
Government also has a role to play in attracting new investment and giving rural entrepreneurs access to financing and venture capital. But our financial institutions have shown little support for rural economies. Government has a responsibility to fill that gap, to provide the resources required by the talented men and women in rural Nova Scotia who want to grow a business and employ people in their own communities. I have spoken to successful Nova Scotians in rural communities who have been denied financing, despite having perfect payment records and excellent balance sheets. This government has abandoned rural Nova Scotia. From Britex to Avon Foods, the government has no solutions to the problems. And this budget, Mr. Speaker, will do nothing to change that. Yeah. The Department of Economic Development has been downgraded to an Office of Economic Development with about as much ability to effect change as the Office of Health Promotions. None.
Nobody home.
Nameplates on doors, Mr. Speaker, have made great window dressing for this government, giving offices and ministers titles and flashy job descriptions with no ability or resources to do their jobs is the trademark of this Conservative government. Rural Nova Scotia is hurting, Mr. Speaker, and this budget does nothing to help. But saying the government has done nothing on economic development is too harsh. We've seen some initiatives in economic development in this budget, Mr. Speaker, but those measures are regressive. I'm referring, of course, to the increases to the capital tax. If the Minister of Finance wants to talk about moving our economy forward and making Nova Scotia competitive, why have they increased taxes for the very businesses who are employing thousands of Nova Scotians? I've had an opportunity to listen to a cross-section of the business community, and I can tell you that major employers support many of our smaller communities. In particular, I'd like to tell you about my experience of talking to the Canadian manufacturers and exporters here in Halifax. Their message to me, and the same message to the provincial government, was crystal clear. Get rid of the large corporations tax, because it's killing investment in Nova Scotia and it's killing job creation in our province.
Shame.
Not only has this message been ignored, but the tax has been increased. Increased because of the fiscal mismanagement of this government. That's right. And I'm afraid this tax will cost Nova Scotians jobs. Yeah. Thank you. Going to education. Mr. Speaker, in the area of education, we feel that the public school system has received very little in this budget. We see it basically keeping pace with the cost of living increases, the salary increases of teachers, and expected increases for teacher assistants, but very little more. It is worth mentioning, however, that the tuition agreements are a very good idea. We're glad to see some movement on that. And that the question we have in the tuition agreements is what will happen for the 125 students that are presently at Landmark East, Bridgeway Academy, and Thomas Aquinas Centre. Those students require this assistance too, and it's unclear whether or not that will cover them or only students that are currently coming out of the public system. So we don't see much in the way of public school assistance, and as I said earlier today, it really looks that although Nova Scotians have two priorities, health and education, this budget has really only responded to the first, to health, and not to education. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, our province is very fortunate to be home to some of the finest post-secondary institutions in North America. These institutions give Nova Scotians the opportunity to stay at home and to receive a world-class education. And they also attract the best and the brightest from across Canada, North America, and indeed the world to our great province. Nova Scotia has benefited many times over from the investments government has made in these institutions over the years. But those investments are gone. In my own riding of Clayton Park, Mount St. Vincent University alone injects $75 million into the local economy. Their direct expenditure is $30 million, while university employees spend another $27 million, and the 45 students at the university spend another $14 million directly into our economy. In order to remain competitive and continue to attract top students and faculty, universities like Mount St. Vincent need government support. This government's underfunding of universities and community colleges has left these institutions with no choice but to shift the burden to the students. Just this month, we've seen some dramatic increases in university tuition and fees. The realities of a student in Nova Scotia today are 7.25% tuition increases and $50 per course fees for deferred maintenance on university campuses. They are realities because the government has refused to invest in higher education. Mr. Speaker, our university students have heard the message from government in this budget. It clearly is, you're on your own. We all know how important post-secondary education is in today's economy. Our economy depends on an educated workforce, and the only way to attain education in Nova Scotia is through massive debt loads. Mr. Speaker, I was speaking to my colleague from Kings West yesterday, and he told me of a young woman graduating this year, and her debt load, Mr. Speaker, is $70,000.
Oh, my Lord.
In order to finish her education, she has had to resort to living on a line of credit. Now, I admit, Mr. Speaker, this example is not the norm in Nova Scotia. The average debt now per student is a little over $30,000. Thanks to this government, though, more and more students are unable to complete their education. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to talk a bit about the supposed balanced budget. Claiming a great victory because of a $2.1 million surplus on a $6 billion budget is nothing short of absurd. One need only look at some of the forecasts and you begin to understand the whole story. Revenue projections are at best optimistic, but many would contend they are even stretched. It's a great game the government has played every year. Overestimate revenue, underestimate costs, adjust accounting rules in the last 3 months of the fiscal year, and poof, a balanced budget. Look at the estimates for the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. The Nova Scotia Liquor Commission estimates are up 9% for this year alone.
Magic Christie.
One wonders what this is based on. The minister may be hoping for an extended Stanley Cup playoff to promote beer sales. Look at the estimates for retail sales. Forecasted 2 years ago at less than 1%, this government now estimates retail sales will grow at over 4% this year. I wish I could share their optimism. In fact, Mr. Speaker, since coming to power in 1999, the Tories have had reason to be optimistic. They have enjoyed the benefits of our growing economy, and in turn they have had $1 billion more to spend than the previous Liberal government had available.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
You even squandered that.
The sad part of this story is that that $1 billion extra in the coffers has still not solved our health and education problems. This government has not restored our roads and infrastructure. The truth is they continue to blame others for their lack of self-reliance in good economic times when our own revenues from within the province have grown dramatically. But Nova Scotians are not fooled. They are not fooled because they can see that our debt continues to grow year by year. This year, the debt will reach $12.3 billion. It amounts to $13,000 per person, and this year alone it has grown by $120 million. Nova Scotians know the money that we spend servicing the debt also continues to grow year after year. Over $1 billion of hard-earned taxpayer money will go not to providing services for Nova Scotians, but into the pockets of Bay Street and Wall Street bankers. And probably most troubling to me with respect to this balanced budget is the fact that the district health authorities, that account for a large share of the provincial budget, have still not had their business plans approved. Not that we should be surprised, Mr. Speaker. It took the government 3/4 of a year last year to give that approval. No, Mr. Speaker, the business plans have not yet been approved, and when we asked a departmental official about that yesterday, he told us there are still a few issues we will continue to have some discussions about. Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to health care, issues usually mean money, and I very much doubt that the supposed surplus can withstand too many health issues. Even a blip in these budgets could blow the meager $2.1 million surplus out of the water. Without a doubt, the budget surplus that is forecast this year is tiny, it is tenuous, and it's likely to be transient as well. Unlike their rhetoric, Mr. Speaker, the legacy of this government will be its financial mismanagement. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is the result of many years of fiscal mismanagement, and it is a budget of self-inflicted wounds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The estimates are referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Supply. The Honourable Government House. Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Could I have the permission of the House, unanimous consent to revert to notices of motion?
Is it agreed? The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and based on some discussion and a small revision, if I could read this resolution once again for the consideration of the House. And Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for the past 11 years, hundreds of students from Yarmouth High School have honoured the sacrifices of World War II veterans through music, video and stage shows under the banner of 440 Productions. And whereas George Egan, the director of 440 Productions, has encouraged young people to achieve their highest potential while making a personal connection with our veterans. Whereas 440 Productions is planning a tour of Britain where they will act as ambassadors, sharing wartime songs and stories with veterans. Therefore, be it resolved, the students and organisers of 440 Productions be congratulated for their commitment to our veterans, and that the Government of Nova Scotia join the British High Commission, numerous Royal Canadian Legions, and others in considering financial support for their planned British tour. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to, your leave to introduce a group of students who have come to visit the legislature under the leadership of their teacher, Jane Geldart, students from the Halifax Immigrant Learning Centre. So, if you'd like to rise. And thank you very much.
Certainly welcome our guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on Monday at the hour of 2 p.m. and the House will sit from 2 till 10. The order of business following the daily routine will be Committee of the Whole House on Supply, and we will be in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, we'll be starting with the estimates of the Department of Health, and in the red chamber we'll be starting with the estimates of the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. And Mr. Speaker, following the 4 hours of supply, we will continue with public bills for second reading, and we will be dealing with the adjourned debate on Bill 48 and then proceeding numerically through the remainder. So, Mr. Speaker, with those that information, Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now rise and adjourn. Thank you.
Motion of the House adjourned to 2 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. We adjourn to 2 p.m. Monday.